The sun dipped below the skyline of Atlanta, Georgia, casting a golden glow over the Thompson household, a charming two-story home on a quiet cul-de-sac. Inside, newlyweds Derek Thompson and Sophia Green were settling into the rhythms of married life. Their neighbors often remarked on how perfect they seemed. Derek, the hard-working construction worker with calloused hands and a warm smile, and Sophia, the enchanting hairstylist who could light up any room with her laugh. But beneath the surface, their story would soon take a dark and twisted turn. A secret that Sophia had buried deep, a truth she feared would shatter everything, was about to be unearthed. It wasn't just any secret, it was the kind that could ignite a firestorm, one that would leave scars on the lives it touched. This revelation would not only end a love story, but mark the beginning of one of the most brutal crimes Atlanta had ever seen. Derek Thompson was a man carved out of simplicity and grit. At 33, he was the embodiment of stability, with hands hardened by years of construction work and a heart softened by a longing for companionship. Derek's life had been a steady march forward, one day at a time, one task at a time. Raised in the rural outskirts of Georgia, he was a man of routine, faith, and unwavering principles. People admired Derek's work ethic and his straightforward demeanor. Though he wasn't particularly outgoing, there was a quiet kindness in him that drew others in, a trait that made him a pillar of his community. Sophia Green, on the other hand, was Derek's polar opposite in almost every way. At 29, she radiated life and energy, a whirlwind of charm and creativity. Her laughter was infectious, her smile magnetic, and her presence commanded attention wherever she went. Sophia worked as a hairstylist, a profession that perfectly suited her vibrant personality. Clients adored her not just for her skill, but for her ability to listen, to empathize, and to make anyone feel like the center of the universe. Born and raised in the heart of Atlanta, Sophia had always dreamed big. She was ambitious and bold, but there was a tenderness to her, a quiet vulnerability that made her even more captivating. Their paths crossed at a local church fundraiser, a serendipitous moment that seemed almost too perfect to be true. Sophia, balancing a plate of snacks and a cup of punch, bumped into Derek, spilling the bright red liquid onto his shirt. Embarrassed, she scrambled to apologize, but Derek simply laughed, brushing it off as if it were nothing. That laugh, so warm and genuine, caught Sophia off guard. It was the kind of moment that felt straight out of a romantic movie, a meet-cute that neither of them could have anticipated. What followed was a whirlwind romance that left everyone around them in awe. Derek, who had always been cautious and reserved, found himself opening up in ways he never thought possible. Sophia, who had built walls around her own insecurities, felt safe and cherished in Derek's presence. They balanced each other, like two puzzle pieces that had finally found their match. Derek admired Sophia's spontaneity, her ability to find joy in the smallest things, while Sophia loved Derek's steadiness and the sense of security he brought into her life. Their courtship was brief but intense. Within months, Derek proposed on a quiet summer evening, under the glow of fairy lights in Sophia's favorite park. She said yes without hesitation, tears streaming down her face as she envisioned a future filled with love and happiness. Their wedding was an intimate affair, a blend of Derek's traditional values and Sophia's flair for the extraordinary. Friends and family gathered to celebrate a union that seemed destined to last forever. From the outside, they were the picture of perfection. Neighbors would often see Derek tending to their modest garden, while Sophia waved at passers-by, her ever-present smile lighting up the street. They were the couple everyone envied, the kind that seemed to have it all. But perfection, as it often does, was an illusion. Beneath the surface of their seemingly idyllic marriage lay a secret that Sophia had buried deep, a truth she feared could destroy everything. While she loved Derek with all her heart, her past was a shadow she could never fully escape. And though Derek adored Sophia, he was a man of absolutes, someone for whom honesty and trust were as essential as the air he breathed. Their love story was one of contrasts, a steadfast man and a spirited woman, drawn together by fate, but tested by the weight of their own unspoken truths. It was a story that captivated everyone who knew them, but like all stories, it was built on the fragile foundation of human complexity. Little did they know, the foundation would soon crack under the pressure of secrets too heavy to bear. At first, Derek didn't notice much out of the ordinary. Their daily lives seemed to carry on as usual. Coffee together in the morning, Sophia heading off to the salon, Derek returning late from the construction site with dusty boots and a tired smile. But over time, small, almost imperceptible changes began to chip away at the tranquility of their married life. It started with Sophia's phone. She had always been open with Derek, often showing him funny memes or chatting freely about her day. Now her phone seemed to have become an extension of her hand. It buzzed constantly, and Derek couldn't help but notice how quickly she would grab it, shielding the screen as though guarding a treasure. Derek told himself not to overthink it. Everyone deserved a bit of privacy after all. But then there were the late nights. Sophia, who once couldn't stay awake past 10 p.m., suddenly had errands that kept her out until midnight. Just catching up with an old friend, she'd say, flashing that dazzling smile that Derek loved so much. And yet, her explanations felt thin. Derek couldn't explain why, but something about her newfound unpredictability didn't sit right with him. Then there were the odd phone calls. Derek would walk into the room, and Sophia's cheerful voice would abruptly lower to a hushed murmur, her words vague and hurried. "Work stuff," she'd say dismissively, slipping the phone back into her pocket. But Derek knew better. Sophia's job didn't involve late-night phone calls, and it certainly didn't require her to be so secretive. One evening, Derek came home earlier than usual, surprising Sophia in the middle of what appeared to be a heated phone conversation. She froze when she saw him, her face a mix of shock and guilt. "It's nothing," she stammered, ending the call abruptly. "Just a client being difficult." Her explanation felt rehearsed, hollow even. Derek nodded, forcing a smile. But the seed of doubt had already been planted. He began noticing other details, little things he would have overlooked before. Sophia's wardrobe began to change. She started dressing up more often, even on days when she claimed to be running mundane errands. Expensive perfume lingered in the air long after she had left the house, a scent she hadn't worn when they first met. Receipts from upscale restaurants and boutique stores began appearing in their trash, places Derek knew they hadn't visited together. When he asked about them, Sophia would laugh it off. "A girl's day out," she'd say, her tone light and carefree. But Derek could feel the tension between her words, like a violin string stretched too tight. Derek's nights became restless. He'd lie awake beside her, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing with unanswered questions. He tried to convince himself that he was imagining things, that his fears were the byproduct of long work hours and fatigue. Yet deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that Sophia was hiding something. One Saturday, while cleaning the house, Derek stumbled upon a crumpled envelope in the back of a drawer. It was addressed to Sophia but sent from a name he didn't recognize. The handwriting was messy, almost rushed, and inside was a brief, cryptic note. "We need to talk. It's urgent." No signature, no further details. Derek's heart pounded as he reread the note, his mind spiraling with possibilities. Who was this person? What was so urgent? And why hadn't Sophia mentioned it to him? Derek didn't confront her immediately. Instead, he began watching her more closely, piecing together the fragments of her unusual behavior. He noticed how she avoided eye contact whenever certain topics came up, how her laughter felt forced, how her movements seemed jittery, like she was constantly on edge. It was as if Sophia was a stranger wearing his wife's face, a version of her that he didn't recognize. The more Derek observed, the deeper his suspicions grew. He felt trapped in a web of uncertainty, torn between his love for Sophia and the nagging voice in his head that whispered, "Something isn't right." His trust, once as solid as a rock, now felt like sand slipping through his fingers. Yet, even as doubt consumed him, Derek couldn't have imagined the depth of the secret Sophia was keeping, or how it would shatter their world in ways he could never undo. Derek had never been the kind of man to snoop through someone else's belongings. It went against everything he believed about trust and respect in a relationship. But on a chilly November evening, while Sophia was out on yet another mysterious errand, the weight of his suspicions became too much to bear. As he sat alone in their quiet home, the glow of the television doing little to dispel the darkness in his mind, Derek decided he could no longer ignore the nagging questions that plagued him. He began hesitantly, telling himself that he was simply trying to protect what they had. First, he checked the obvious places, her purse, her nightstand drawer, nothing out of the ordinary. But when he opened her closet, his breath caught. Hidden behind a row of neatly hung dresses was a small, locked box. He had never seen it before. Its sleek black surface gleamed under the light, and it was out of place among Sophia's usual belongings. Derek hesitated, his hand hovering over the box. What if he was wrong? What if this was nothing more than an innocent keepsake? But the questions refused to leave him alone. After a brief search, he found a tiny key in the lining of her jewelry box. His hands trembled as he unlocked the mysterious container. Inside, he found an assortment of items that sent his heart racing. There were photos, Sophia with a man he didn't recognize. They were close in the pictures, their smiles wide, their hands often touching. It wasn't just the photos, though. There were letters, handwritten in a looping, elegant script. Derek scanned the first one, his stomach twisting as he read the affectionate words addressed to Sophia. "I miss you more than words can say. I can't wait until we're together again. This can't stay a secret forever." But the discovery didn't end there. Beneath the photos and letters was a small folder containing financial documents, bank statements, credit card bills, all tied to an account Derek didn't know existed. The transactions painted a picture that made his blood run cold: hotel stays, expensive dinners, gifts. It was as if Sophia had an entirely separate life, one that she had meticulously hidden from him. Derek's mind raced. The man in the photos, was he the one Sophia had been meeting late at night? Was he the reason for her secrecy, her sudden changes in behavior? And why hadn't she said anything about the money? They had always been open about their finances, planning their future together down to the smallest detail. This was a betrayal on every level. In a fit of desperation, Derek opened her laptop, which she had carelessly left on the kitchen counter. She had always been protective of it. Another behavior he had dismissed as a quirk until now. Her password was easy to guess, her childhood dog's name. Once inside, he found an email account he hadn't known she used. As he scrolled through the messages, his worst fears were confirmed. There were emails between Sophia and the man from the photos. They spoke in cryptic terms, but the intimacy was undeniable. They talked about their plans to meet, their dreams of a future together. Derek's hands clenched into fists as he read one message in particular. "I wish I could tell him the truth, but it's too dangerous right now. He wouldn't understand." Dangerous? What could possibly be so dangerous? Derek's mind filled with images of Sophia wrapped in some criminal conspiracy, her secret life unraveling everything they had built together. He felt like the floor beneath him had crumbled, leaving him suspended over a pit of despair and rage. But then he saw the email that stopped him cold. It was from just a week ago, sent to the same man. Sophia had written, "I'm almost ready to end this. Derek deserves better than lies, but I don't know how he'll react. I'm scared." Derek reread the words, his emotions shifting from betrayal to confusion. What was she planning to end? And why was she scared? The room seemed to close in around Derek as he tried to process what he had uncovered. His wife, the woman he had vowed to love and cherish, had been living a double life. Yet the more he uncovered, the more questions arose. Who was this man? What was Sophia so afraid of? And most importantly, what would Derek do with the truth he had uncovered? Derek knew one thing for certain: the answers he sought would change everything. And as he sat in their home, surrounded by the fragments of his wife's hidden world, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was standing on the edge of a precipice, about to plunge into the unknown. The night of the confrontation was one Derek would never forget. The air felt heavy, charged with an almost tangible tension, as he sat in the dimly lit living room, waiting for Sophia to return. His heart was pounding in his chest, his thoughts racing as he rehearsed the words he would say, only to discard them moments later. Nothing felt adequate enough to express the storm of emotions inside him. betrayal, confusion, anger, and heartbreak all colliding at once. The sound of the front door unlocking jolted him from his thoughts. Derek straightened, his body rigid as Sophia stepped inside, her silhouette illuminated by the streetlights outside. She looked startled to see him sitting there, her smile faltering as she noticed the intensity in his gaze. "You're home early," she said, her voice carefully neutral. Derek noticed the way her fingers gripped the strap of her purse just a little too tightly. "I thought we needed to talk," he replied, his tone steady but edged with a coldness that made Sophia pause. She set her purse down on the counter, her movements slow and deliberate. "What's going on?" she asked, trying to sound casual, but Derek could hear the slight tremor in her voice. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached for the small black box that now sat on the coffee table. He placed it in front of him with deliberate precision, watching her reaction. Her face paled, her eyes widening as she took a step back. "Where did you get that?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Derek leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees as he looked up at her, his expression a mix of hurt and anger. "I found it," he said simply, "and I opened it." The silence that followed was deafening. Sophia's lips parted as if she wanted to say something, but no words came out. She looked at the box, then back at Derek, her chest rising and falling rapidly. "You had no right," she began, but Derek cut her off, his voice rising for the first time. "I had every right," he shouted, the words echoing through the room. "I'm your husband, Sophia. I had every right to know what you've been hiding from me, to understand why the woman I married has been lying to me for months." Sophia flinched at his tone, tears welling up in her eyes. "It's not what you think," she said weakly. But Derek wasn't ready to hear her excuses. "Not what I think?" he repeated, standing up and towering over her. "I found the photos, the letters, the emails. I know about the other man, Sophia. I know about the secret bank account. I know you've been lying to me every single day." Sophia's face crumpled, and she sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. Derek stood over her, his fists clenched, waiting for her to explain, to defend herself, to say something, anything, that could make sense of the chaos she had unleashed in their lives. "I didn't want you to find out like this," she said finally, her voice muffled by her hands. "Then how did you want me to find out?" Derek shot back. "Were you planning to just leave one day, disappear without a word? Or were you waiting for me to stumble upon this mess like I did tonight?" Sophia shook her head, tears streaming down her face as she looked up at him. "You don't understand," she said, her voice trembling. "It's not just about us. It's about him." Derek froze at her words, his anger momentarily eclipsed by confusion. "Him," he repeated. "Who is he, Sophia? Who is this man you've been seeing behind my back?" Sophia hesitated, her eyes darting away from his as if she couldn't bear to meet his gaze. "His name is Michael," she said finally. He's someone I used to know, before you. Before any of this." Derek's jaw tightened. "And you just decided to pick up where you left off, while you were married to me?" "No," Sophia exclaimed, her voice cracking. "It's not like that. Michael, he's in trouble, Derek. He needed my help. I couldn't just turn my back on him." "Trouble?" Derek repeated incredulously. "What kind of trouble? And why did you have to keep it a secret from me?" Sophia took a deep breath, her hands trembling as she tried to steady herself. "Because I was scared," she admitted. "Michael, he got involved with some dangerous people. I've been helping him pay off his debts, trying to keep him safe. I didn't want to drag you into it. I thought I could handle it on my own." Derek stared at her, his mind racing. Her explanation only raised more questions. Why had she been so willing to risk their marriage for this man? And what kind of danger was she talking about? "Do you even hear yourself?" Derek said, his voice laced with disbelief. "You've been lying to me, sneaking around, funneling money into a secret account. For what? For someone who isn't even part of our life?" Sophia's tears fell freely now, her shoulders shaking with sobs. "I didn't mean for it to get this far," she said, her voice breaking. "I thought I could protect you. I thought I could protect us." Derek ran a hand through his hair, his emotions warring within him. He didn't know what to believe anymore. The woman he had trusted above all else had betrayed him. But as he looked at her now, broken and vulnerable, he couldn't deny the love he still felt for her. "You should have told me," he said finally, his voice softer but no less firm. "We could have faced this together. But now, I don't even know who you are anymore." Sophia reached out to him, her eyes pleading. "I'm still the same person, Derek. I'm still your wife. I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. But I never stopped loving you." Derek took a step back, his heart heavy. "Love isn't enough, Sophia. Not without trust." The room fell silent again, the weight of their shattered relationship hanging heavily between them. For the first time, Derek realized that the life they had built together might never be the same again. And as he turned and walked away, leaving Sophia alone in the darkness, he knew that their story was far from over. The fateful night of the murder descended on Atlanta like a harbinger of doom, the city's vibrant pulse dimmed under a blanket of oppressive stillness. Derek had spent the evening pacing his apartment, his thoughts spiraling into dark, uncontrollable places. The betrayal and the lies churned in his mind like a storm, each wave of anger and pain crashing harder than the last. He hadn't spoken to Sophia in days, hadn't been able to look at her without seeing the ghost of Michael lingering between them. Yet, tonight felt different, charged with a sense of inevitability he couldn't quite place. Around midnight, Derek decided he needed answers. Real answers. The half-truths and cryptic confessions Sophia had offered weren't enough to untangle the mess their lives had become. He grabbed his coat and left, the chill of the autumn night biting against his skin, as he drove to the modest suburban house Sophia had rented for Michael under a fake name. The house was eerily quiet when he arrived, the dim light from a single lamp in the living room spilling onto the front lawn. Derek's heart pounded as he approached the door, his fists clenched at his sides. He didn't knock. Instead, he tried the handle and found it unlocked. The door creaked open, revealing a scene that made his blood run cold. Sophia was there, standing in the middle of the living room, her face pale and streaked with tears. Across from her, Michael sat slumped in an armchair, his shirt stained with blood. A jagged wound across his chest told Derek everything he needed to know. Michael was dead. "What the hell happened here?" Derek demanded, his voice a mix of shock and fury. Sophia turned to him, her hands trembling as she clutched a bloodied kitchen knife. I didn't mean to," she stammered, her voice breaking. "He was angry. He was out of control. He threatened me, Derek. I didn't know what else to do." Derek's gaze shifted between her and Michael's lifeless body, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. "You killed him?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sophia nodded, her tears flowing freely now. "He found out that I told you about him. He said I'd ruined everything, that I had to pay. He came at me, Derek. I was scared. I grabbed the knife and it just happened." The weight of her words hung heavy in the air, but Derek wasn't convinced. His eyes narrowed as he stepped closer, his voice growing colder. "You expect me to believe that this was self-defense, after everything you've lied about?" Sophia recoiled at his accusation, her grip on the knife tightening. "It's the truth," she cried. "I swear to you, Derek. I didn't plan this. I didn't want this." But Derek's mind was racing, piecing together fragments of conversations and half-truths. The secret meetings, the money transfers, the growing tension, it all pointed to something far more sinister. Was Sophia telling the truth? Or was this murder part of a larger plan she had been hiding all along? As the minutes ticked by, the room seemed to shrink, the walls closing in on them. Derek's breathing grew heavier, his fists clenching as his anger reached a boiling point. "You've dragged me into your mess, Sophia," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "And now there's no way out." Sophia dropped the knife, the clang of metal against hardwood echoing through the room. She fell to her knees, her sobs racking her body. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," she whispered. "I just wanted to protect you, to protect us." But Derek wasn't listening anymore. His mind was already racing ahead, calculating the consequences of what had just happened. The police would ask questions, too many questions. And Sophia's story, riddled with inconsistencies and lies, wouldn't hold up under scrutiny. "You've ruined everything," he muttered, his voice filled with a mix of despair and rage. Sophia looked up at him, her tear-streaked face a mask of anguish. "Please, Derek, you have to help me. I can't do this alone." Derek stared at her, his heart a storm of conflicting emotions. The woman he had loved, the life they had built together, it was all slipping away, lost in the chaos of betrayal and bloodshed. And as he stood there, the weight of their shattered reality pressing down on him, he realized that nothing would ever be the same again. The night stretched on, the silence broken only by Sophia's sobs and Derek's heavy breathing. Outside, the world continued to turn, oblivious to the darkness that had consumed their lives. But inside that house, 2 lives had been irrevocably changed, and 1 had been lost forever. The hours following Michael's murder unfolded like a fever dream, surreal and oppressive. Derek and Sophia stood in the dimly lit living room, their breaths coming in shallow, uneven gasps. Michael's lifeless body lay sprawled on the armchair, a grotesque reminder of the irreversible turn their lives had taken. Time seemed to stretch and contract, warping under the weight of their panic. Every second that ticked by carried the threat of discovery, the possibility of a knock on the door or the flash of police lights outside. Sophia, still on her knees, clung to Derek's leg like a drowning woman grasping for a lifeline. "We have to do something," she whispered, her voice trembling. "We can't just leave him here." Derek's mind raced, every logical solution clashing with the growing dread in his chest. He paced the room, his hands tangling in his hair. "This is insane," he muttered. This is murder, Sophia. Do you even understand what that means?" "I didn't mean for it to happen," she cried, her voice cracking with desperation. "I was trying to protect myself. You have to believe me." But Derek wasn't sure what he believed anymore. The woman in front of him, sobbing and trembling, was a stranger. This wasn't the Sophia he thought he knew, the vibrant, loving woman he had married. This was someone else entirely, someone capable of dragging him into the depths of chaos with her. As the hours crept on, the weight of the decision they faced became unbearable. They couldn't call the police. Sophia's tangled web of lies would unravel, and the authorities would see through any flimsy story of self-defense. Michael's presence in Atlanta alone was incriminating, an illicit arrangement Sophia had orchestrated and concealed. Derek's thoughts turned darker. He couldn't help but consider the implications for himself. He already lied for her once, covering up her secrets without even realizing it. If this crime came to light, he would be implicated. His fingerprints were on the door, the furniture, perhaps even the knife Sophia had used. The lines between guilt and innocence were blurring, binding him to her in ways he couldn't escape. "Derek, please," Sophia begged, her voice hoarse. "We have to get rid of the body. If anyone finds out, it's over for both of us." Her words hit him like a blow. Get rid of the body. It was unthinkable, and yet the chilling logic of it pressed down on him. They had no other options, not if they wanted to survive this. Derek's stomach churned at the thought, his mind recoiling from the sheer horror of what she was suggesting. But as he looked into her tear-streaked face, he saw something else there. Something that terrified him even more. Determination. Sophia had already resolved to do whatever it took to cover her tracks. "I can't believe this is happening," he muttered, his voice barely audible. He ran a hand over his face, trying to think clearly. Fine. We'll move the body. But you're going to tell me everything, Sophia. No more lies." Sophia nodded frantically, clinging to his agreement like it was her salvation. "I promise. I'll tell you everything. Just help me, Derek, please." What followed was a grim, haunting sequence of events that would sear itself into Derek's memory forever. They wrapped Michael's body in a sheet, the crimson stain of his wound soaking through the fabric as they worked in tense, horrified silence. The weight of the body was more than just physical. It was the crushing realization of what they were doing, the irreversible step they were taking together. They loaded the body into the trunk of Derek's car, their movements mechanical and jerky. Outside, the world was quiet, the suburban street deserted under the faint glow of streetlights. Every creak of the car's suspension, every crunch of gravel under their feet, felt deafening. Derek couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching, that at any moment a curtain would twitch or a door would open, and their secret would be exposed. They drove in silence, the hum of the engine the only sound. Sophia stared straight ahead, her hands clenched in her lap, while Derek gripped the wheel with white-knuckled intensity. His mind raced with questions, doubts, and fears. Where would they go? What would they do with the body? Would they ever escape this nightmare? Sophia directed him to a remote stretch of woods outside the city, a place she claimed was secluded and rarely visited. They worked quickly, digging into the cold, hard earth with shovels Derek had hastily grabbed from his garage. Every thrust of the blade felt like a betrayal of his morals, a descent deeper into a darkness he couldn't escape. When the deed was done, they stood in the shadows of the trees, staring at the disturbed patch of earth that now held their secret. Derek felt hollow, his body numb from exhaustion and shock. Sophia clung to him, her sobs muffled against his chest. "It's over," she whispered, as if saying it aloud would make it true. But Derek knew better. It wasn't over. It would never be over. The weight of their actions would follow them, a ghost that would haunt every moment of their lives. And as they drove back to the city in silence, the gravity of what they had done settled over them like a shroud. The murder might have been Sophia's crime, but now Derek was complicit, and in the quiet hours before dawn, he realized that their lives were no longer their own. They belonged to the secret they had buried in the woods, and the terrible, unspoken bond it had forged between them. In the months that followed the murder, the consequences of their actions slowly unfurled, each moment more harrowing than the last. The once serene city of Atlanta, known for its bustling streets and vibrant culture, became the backdrop for a chilling investigation that cast a long shadow over Derek and Sophia. As the days turned into weeks, the suffocating pressure of keeping their dark secret began to erode their sense of reality. At first, there was no sign of suspicion. The police hadn't yet linked Michael's disappearance to any foul play, and Derek and Sophia thought they might have gotten away with it. They told themselves that they had covered their tracks well, that the body was too far buried, that there were no witnesses, no evidence to trace back to them. But beneath the surface, the case simmered. Investigators, now piecing together the fragments of Michael's life, uncovered inconsistencies in the story Sophia had told about his disappearance. The trail, however faint, began to grow stronger. The breakthrough came when a surveillance camera from a nearby gas station captured Derek's car on the night Michael vanished. The image was grainy, but it was enough to raise alarms. The authorities launched a full-scale investigation, digging into every aspect of Michael's life, including his relationship with Sophia, whose cryptic explanations only served to deepen the detectives' suspicions. Derek had been careful, trying to maintain his innocence by acting calm, almost too calm, but his every move was now being scrutinized. As the noose tightened, the legal proceedings began. Derek and Sophia were both arrested, though for different reasons. Sophia was charged with first-degree murder, with the possibility of life in prison without parole, while Derek faced charges of obstruction of justice and accessory to the crime. The courtroom became the stage for an intense legal battle, with the prosecution painting a picture of a calculated, brutal crime, while the defense clung to the notion that Sophia had acted out of self-defense. The tension was palpable, the air thick with the weight of the truth finally beginning to surface. Sophia's defense team argued that she had been in fear for her life, with Michael having threatened her in the days leading up to the confrontation. They painted her as a victim of abuse, someone who had been cornered into a deadly situation. But this narrative began to unravel as the investigation dug deeper into Sophia's past. Evidence surfaced showing that Michael had not been the threat she claimed, and that she had in fact been orchestrating the entire situation from behind the scenes. Her manipulation was evident in the lies she had told, the careful plotting that led to Michael's murder. The jury saw through her facade, and the case against her grew stronger by the day. Derek, too, found himself caught in a web of deceit. His initially silent complicity now became a critical part of the prosecution's case. As witnesses came forward, recounting Derek's strange behavior in the aftermath of Michael's death, the walls began to close in. His own testimony became a delicate balancing act, a constant struggle to maintain his innocence while facing the mounting evidence against him. His mind wavered between guilt and self-preservation, and it became increasingly difficult to separate the man he once was from the man who had buried a body and lied to protect a murderer. The trial was a spectacle that captivated the city. News outlets covered every aspect of the case, from the shocking murder to the twists and turns in the courtroom. Derek and Sophia were no longer just local figures, they were the subjects of national fascination. The public was riveted by the complexity of the case, the seemingly perfect marriage that had fallen apart, the chilling secret that had turned their lives upside down. People debated whether they were simply victims of their circumstances, or whether they had always been capable of such violence. As the trial wore on, the tension in the courtroom reached a fever pitch. Derek and Sophia's fate hung in the balance, their lives reduced to a spectacle for the world to see. The final moments of the trial were agonizing, each word from the defense or prosecution a potential turning point. But in the end, justice came at a high price. Sophia was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. The court had found her guilty of planning and executing Michael's murder, a cold and deliberate act. Her emotional outbursts during the trial were no longer enough to convince the jury of her innocence. The legacy she had built, the facade of a loving wife and successful woman, was shattered in an instant. Derek, though not guilty of murder, faced his own reckoning. His role as an accessory to the crime was undeniable. The court found him guilty of obstruction of justice and conspiracy, sentencing him to a lengthy prison term. His world crumbled before him as he realized the extent to which he had been drawn into Sophia's web. His relationship with her had cost him everything: his freedom, his reputation, and his future. The final verdicts were delivered in a courtroom that seemed to pulse with the collective heartbeat of the city. For Derek and Sophia, the world they had once known was gone. They were left to face the consequences of their actions, not just in the eyes of the law, but in the court of public opinion. Their names became synonymous with betrayal, manipulation, and a tragic fall from grace. In the years that followed, the legacy of their crime lived on in the form of whispers and rumors. The story of Derek and Sophia Thompson was told and retold, each retelling more distorted than the last. They became a cautionary tale, a symbol of the fragility of trust and the terrifying consequences of letting deceit consume one's life. The city of Atlanta, once a place of hope and possibility, now carried the weight of a tragedy that would never be forgotten. For Derek and Sophia, their lives would never return to normal. The walls of their prison cells would become their new reality, and the echo of Michael's death would haunt them until the end of their days. The legacy of their crime would forever be etched in the annals of Atlanta's darkest chapters.